malnourished from eating the menu kind of thing. And that the more faith we put in the algorithm and technology and science, the less we seem to trust our own direct experience, you know? I was thinking about how people call, when they Google, they call it like consulting the oracle. Yeah, it's an interesting. There's become our prosthetic memory, but because we can always just look something up, but it's also kind of become our prosthetic intuition, you know. And GPS would be another, a good example of that, of how to navigate. So, it's a really interesting talk about all that. And I was interested in when you said, when you brought up stand-up comedy, because it seems like that humor is, like when I'm writing, I'm more and more aware of that humor is the, well, I guess to use a tech term, a hack, a reality hack, or hack of life. Mind hack.
Right. I think this was something about humor, which I guess I was aware of today, is that for it to work, and it's interesting what's happened to humor now, is people have probably heard or noticed humor's become so much about just virtue signaling and just trashing all the people that should be trashed. So really it's got nothing to do with humor. And certainly there's plenty of people who do humor who aren't funny. I mean, there always have been, but what I was thinking was that for humor to really work, like if we think in our daily lives, we have to be relaxed. Like if you think of something really funny, oops, somebody, just mute that person. If you're in a social setting, you think of something funny, but it doesn't just come out. You just like wait for your moment, and then you say it. The extent to which you're not relaxed and it's forced, it just falls flat. It doesn't matter how funny the line is, right?
Right.
It comes out in the wrong way, you lay an egg. And on the opposite spectrum, one can be funny just by making random comments that aren't necessarily particularly witty or anything, but just the way they come out, there's humor in it, right? Mm-hmm. So
yeah, well, that would be like because so much of reality is scripted, we get a thrill out of something that's unscripted and of the moment,
Right. So, but that, I mean, I think that relates to why it's a hack, but because, well, what you just said, actually, that is the hack thing, isn't it? But particularly if you're talking about very serious subjects, as I have been today, and one of the things I noticed quite early on was I was more tense than usual, and it wasn't exactly, I didn't feel like I was more self-conscious, but it was just that I had a lot of information and a lot of stuff I was trying to work out. So then I become very serious, and the seriousness, I think, relates to tension in the body, gravity, and also when you're talking about Google and GPS and all that, I had thought that but that's a big part of the snare is making us rely more and more on technology for things that our bodies can do, and how that plays in with the reduction of the body to a mechanical thing that doesn't really have capacities outside of the purely mechanical. It can shit, it can eat, it can fuck, it can walk, it can talk, and do all these things, but it can't intuit, it can't find its way, through a strange city or a jungle. It can't, all the things that the body can do, like we don't even know, but there's a vast array of the things that the body is capable of. Anyway, that just occurred to me. And again, I think the capacity to be relaxed is essential to doing anything in life.
Yeah. Is that a new Christmas sweater?
I don't think it's a Christmas. Oh, it is a Christmas one. There you go. It's got snowflakes on it. So this is kind of a bit of a sort of trial or sandpit for that, because it's much, generally for people it's more difficult to be relaxed in a group.
Yeah, me too. Who are all these strange faces?
Well, you know Martin from email.
Hi, Martin.
And Martin's been on a podcast. And Chris is the only other visible face who nobody would know but me. I've met Chris before. And I don't know who the others are. Not really, maybe a little bit. SJ, I know SJ from, we did a podcast together. Right, he's nodding.
I can turn this back on. Yeah, we did a podcast on SyncBook Radio with Dennis Cook and Alex Fulton.
Right.
About 2 years ago, something like that. So nice to see you again, and nice to be here.
Likewise. Well, I haven't actually seen you before, so
Okay.
for the first time.
Also, I see you on Parapolitical Research Society. It's kind of that small Facebook community. So
yeah.
We're both members of that.
Yeah, well, I appreciate your questions over at YouTube. You seem to have a lot of thoughts going on. Do you have anything now?
Yeah, I mean, I just thinking about this, I guess, nexus. I don't know if you want to call it this connective place where it seems like what your work is getting at, which is more of the internal psychological. I mean, I'm just putting words out here. I know you'd probably want to change what I'm saying, how I'm phrasing this, but just kind of the embodiment, kind of unpacking our own internal, fragmentation or entanglement or whatever, removing the toxins, let's say, versus the societal side of that and the kind of power structure and how that power structure is either exploiting this fragmentation process or deliberately creating it. And I guess, so my interest is how much of, I think that both are necessary, both the knowledge of the power structure and the study of that. I don't see it as being in vain. I'm not saying you necessarily do, but I think earlier you referred to it as it breaks down at some point. And I guess for me that there is a lot of utility in analyzing the lies, let's say, that are propagated in the system, because I think that they are part of the mechanism that continues shutting down that awareness and that embodiment that you're referring to. So it's, I don't know, that's just kind of what I'm interested in, is that nexus between parapolitical research and the psychological research. And that's why I was, kind of asking the questions I was there. And it kind of seemed to be focused on like Bernays and what's at the top of the power structure, et cetera. Just one last thing. I mean, like someone that thinks 9/11 was done by Osama bin Laden, for example, or that buys the official story, I'm very skeptical of that person's ability to maybe wake up in this kind of deeper way. And maybe that skepticism is misinformed, but it just seems to me you have to have a basic kind of tuned inness to the surroundings, including the political environment, as like a predicate to go deeper. So that's where I'm at with this.
I was just smiling at Martin, or at least I don't know if he was, but anyway, Martin was smiling. I was smiling at him because this has been going on a little bit with Dave Oshana. Hopefully, I'm not talking out of school, but this question of like how important it is to know about what's going on in the world. So I've had to question my own feelings about that, because generally I'm with SJ on that. But I have, more and more over the years, and the more I've got into this, because I have been going deeper and deeper into it, the more I've felt the need to keep bringing it back to how it's improving the quality of my life, if it is and how it is. Because if it isn't, because it's clear that we can see, like with so many things, maybe everything, you can see the distorted or the counterfeit versions of this thing. Like there are millions of people now who are all about finding out what's really going on, and 9/11 inside job, and even, you know, pedophile rings, and there's nothing that we can get into exploring and deconstructing that either hasn't already or won't soon become part of the second matrix, you know, clickbait, infotainment, subculture, that is fodder for the culture at large, as with the movie Under Silver Lake. So that's got to cause us to question, right? Like that was what I said about seeing that movie Under Silver Lake, gave me a bit of a feeling of despair, because I thought, God, maybe all the work I'm doing is just providing fodder for Hollywood. You know, just giving them, I didn't literally think that, but just that it could be used as fodder made me question the value of it. You know, overall I don't, because, and this is why I want to have interactions with readers and listeners, because I do get a lot of confirmation that they're finding it useful in ways that sounds meaningful to me. Like it's not just if somebody writes, says, hey, that was a great book, or that was a great blog post, or, you know, that doesn't mean nearly as much as if they talk about in their own lives how it's helped them to reconcile something or to find some degree of peace, let's say. Not only that, but to use one example that's quite a broad example, it's definitely brought more peace to my life so far, and continues to do so, to be getting real. I mean, that's the cliche, I could boil it down to that, is how to get real. And there's no way to separate getting real in one's own life, I don't think, from getting real about the world that we live in. Otherwise you're compartmentalizing. But on the other hand, we could go too far to the other extreme, as I would, as SJ was saying, and I tend to too. If somebody, I mean, I fell out with my cousin Natasha, who I did a podcast with. It wasn't a big falling out, but I still haven't spoken to her, or she to me, over Hillary Clinton. You know, she's voting for Hillary Clinton, and I was like, what? You know, after all the time we spent together, and you've read Occult Yorkshire, you're going to go out and vote for somebody who's part of, you know, organized pedophilia and da-da-da-da. I went off on my thing, and it was just so, and she was, for her part, she was disturbed. Well, she was in the Trump panic mania, basically. So it wasn't that she was particularly disturbed by anything I was saying, but she was completely closed to it, as I was giving her evidence of Hillary being as bad as Hillary obviously is, and she could only see it as just part of the plot, you know, to get Trump into power, and so then I became in the enemy position. But on my part, what I fell into really was I felt I couldn't respect or talk to this person, because they were just so, to be that compartmentalized. It is really hard to deal with, but we've all got areas that we don't understand. And the other thing, and this is kind of came up more with David Shawn, I think, is how do we know, how sure we can we be with the new interpretations? Like, we can laugh at the people who believe that bin Laden did 9/11, but, well, I mean, 9/11, I don't particularly have a theory about. But, I mean, the people who laugh at bin Laden believers laugh at the no-planers too. They laugh on both sides. Whereas I don't really want to laugh at any of them, but I'm definitely more open to a no-plane version than a Osama bin Laden version. But anyway, I'm just trying to illustrate that spectrum, that once you cross the threshold from the first matrix, consensus reality, you either just go straight into the second matrix, whichever it is, whichever website, whichever disseminator, and just basically go or join the group, whatever it is, the audience cult, and that's your version. Or you just stay liminal. You say, well, I can no longer believe this, but now I've got, well, Sandy Hook was all completely staged, or he was mind controlled, or and so on. And in most cases, I think you have to just leave it a question mark, because you can't research all of them to death. Like I can take a position on the things that I've spent years researching. Then I'm ready to take a position, and then I take a general position, which of course is just, if it's in the mainstream media, it's probably, and it involves some really critical event like Sandy Hook or 9/11, then it's going to be lies. It is going to be lies. You just know that. I know that. Anyway, don't know if that was a full response or not. Oh, it was about the utility of doing this. Well, I suppose what we're at now is that probably most people here, if they listen to me, do find it useful. So that really isn't under question. So then that does become something that's worth questioning, because if we're going to come together and meet and talk on the agreement about these certain things, then we don't want to just become a little audience cult, within or outside of these other audience cults where we all agree, on the utility of parapolitics and psychology, right? Or combining them. I don't want to assume that. It definitely has been useful for me. So I'm all for people it's been useful for. But that's just based on my own experience.
Can I just add one quick thought there? I guess for me, like the parapolitical research, the necessity of it, I often would phrase it, or I think it's useful to phrase it as more of a necessary defense, because it's not like I'm just going out in my front door and then whistling and everything's fine, and then I'm going to go after some kind of parapolitical cross to bear. It's rather you walk out of your front door and it's just a fusillade of stuff coming at you, and so I feel like it's a necessary defense just to have like a minimum level of separation, to say, all right, I'm not going to believe this stuff, just to get some space to breathe. And so I guess I just feel like that's an important distinction, because I guess it's not that I even really want to be doing this in a certain way. It's that I feel like I have to just survive. And I think it's a little bit a different way to phrase it.
Right. Yeah, it probably is more honest, but then it also points to possible danger in that, no, as if something we're doing partly as a defensive strategy, then eventually we can become trapped by it.
Yeah. Well, yeah.
Yeah. As I say, for example, and this comes up at my website in comments and stuff. Like recently, somebody saying, "Well, if you're not fighting evil, then what the fuck are you doing?" Generally, the drive to figure out what's going on with the systems of control, it's likely to include a drive to try and expose it and try and change it, and that may be futile, it may be impossible, just as it may be futile and impossible to really get to the bottom and decide who's at the top. Unintentional play on words there, but I don't personally believe that we can change the system as it is, that we can fully expose it, or that we can see the true mechanisms of it, or that we can resist it, really. I'm not sure it's a good idea to resist it. I think we can circumnavigate it and approach, just live within it in ways that either subvert it or neutralize it for ourselves. I think that, absolutely.
Can I ask the group, like, how knowing or understanding the lies that we're referring to now, that we're asked to believe as a society, how that works with the people that you're closest to? Like, because I often get the feeling that, well, I mean, in my life, it's, you know, I can maybe count on one finger the amount of people who are sort of at my level. Not that I'm necessarily, you know, I'm convinced that I'm right about everything, but in order to have a conversation about these things, and Jason, you talk about sort of not being caught up in these matrices, if I'm right. So, like, it's important what you do day to day within the body and the people that you actually speak to in real life, and like this. But I often find that, well, that's what I'm asking. Do you share a lot of your belief system with the people around you, or do you feel sort of on your own with it?
Well, since Chris asked the group, I'm going to give first tips to everyone else but me. Anyway, I think people know my story in that regard.
I wanted to say a few things anyway, Jason, so I could start with that.
Good, yeah.
Can you hear me all right? Because I'm standing up. I'm not near the iPad, so.
It's all right, yeah. You're audible.
I've spoken to all of my family about this kind of thing, with sort of varying levels of success. I mean, I kind of expose people to what I think they're able to take in. My main objective is to be helpful. As SJ was saying, that it's good for people to have some awareness. It's good for their defences. Stops people being so stressed, so kind of frightened all the time, I think. So anxious, because part of the main thrust of propaganda at the moment is about anxiety, making people anxious, constantly afraid. And so therefore, it's, especially for my mother, I think it's good for her to sort of kind of get out of that kind of shit and to have a bit more of a calmness, to actually laugh at these things. So that's sort of been my main thrust. I'm not really interested in kind of indoctrinating any of them kind of in a particular understanding, or that they have to agree with me about things. I'm just more concerned with that I feel that they have they're better able to negotiate what's happening at the moment, less susceptible to being manipulated, really. But yeah, I try and talk. I mean, people will raise these people that I work with. I work as a carpenter, so I work with a lot of different kind of tradespeople, and so people raise things all the time with me spontaneously, and in this kind of area. And so I'll hear. Often you get kind of, you know, the internet theories, sort of Facebook kind of memes or whatever that people are giving back to you. And so I'll listen to them and kind of try and explain a bit, or maybe that's not realistic, or that doesn't make sense, or just to kind of try and reflect about a bit of reason with people around me. I mean, most people now, it seems, at least that I come into contact, are kind of conspiracy minded in some way, but often they're very far from reality. You know, they're kind of still deeply confused, or kind of being obviously manipulated. So anyway, moving on to the thing I wanted to say, which relates to, I think one of the main objectives in terms of social control at the moment is, and this relates to the issue about artificial intelligence and so on, is I think inducing a state of programmability within the population, within people. And so this question of the second matrix, the sort of David Icke type narratives, those, and this is why they're obviously suspicious, is that they also still induce a state of programmability. I mean, the fundamental objectives, it seems to me, are financialization, essentially, of all or commodification of all aspects of the world and of space also, and then the programmability of life, all life on Earth. And so the sort of conspiracy culture, or that kind of lizards and paedophile rings and all these sorts of things, if they start to induce a state of programmability, a sort of a conscious state of programmability, then they're recognizably, to me, still falling within that same system. And I think a more successful kind of liberation from that system is in leaving behind one's ability to be programmed, and that relates very much to do with the identification with the body that David Oshana talks about, and that you were talking about, Jason, as well. Because I think one of the key objectives that people become confused about is the way that banks or very wealthy people, oligarchs, will be funding political groups that have directly opposite objectives. And the reason for that is to do with this program of financialization and programmability. So people try to interpret it in terms of an ideological. They think, well, how can somebody do that if they believe in such and such thing? Or how can they do it if they believe in such? It's not really an ideological program. It's about an overall system of programmability, a kind of method of population or life control on Earth. So yeah, that's what I wanted to contribute. That relates to, because I've just finished reading Anthony Sutton's Wall Street and the Bolshevik Revolution, which is an excellent book if anyone here hasn't read it. So that relates to the sort of evidence that he presents in that book.
Thanks, Martin. Does anyone want to comment on that, or I will? Anyway, anyone can jump in at any time. Well, not any time, obviously, but I think you can unmute yourself. It was causing me to think about, I mean, this programmability, like what that depends on. And again, I mean, to bring it back to the useful metaphor, the map and the territory, it's a bit circular, but oh, here is a gift. We have removed the 40-minute time limit on your first group meeting. Oh, well, there you go. This meeting now has unlimited minutes. Okay. Wow. So AI has intervened on our behalf. How about that? So yeah, the map and the menu. I mean, it's circular because the more we identify, or the more we refer to the map and not the territory, the more programmable we are. But also, being programmed that's how we're programmed. We're programmed to refer to an external source that isn't reality, an artificial, right? A replica or a counterfeit that seems benign. The map seems to have a benign function. It seems almost neutral, in fact, but neutral, veering towards benign, but actually it isn't. There's a trick in there. Like, they give you the technology and we don't see the hooks in there, that it's so well designed that we'll become dependent on it to refer to, and therefore we'll lose our own point of reference, right? That I relate all that to Martin's point about programmability. And I was wondering if the counter then to programmability relates to, yes, referring to the body, but also referring to one's everyday ordinary life. I was just thinking about how at the blog I've been alternating consciously, but only recently, between the analyses and just these journalistic accounts of the life in the thrift store, and how potentially they're complementary, because the then analysis has the danger of referring too much to maps to create another map. Like, how much of the stuff that I put into the analysis is based on direct experience? Very, very little. So I'm constantly trusting in these other these other sources of information that I can't actually validate, a lot of them for myself. And so the potential for mission creep is greater. And I think this relates to someone like David Icke. The appeal of David Icke is that it's an overarching conspiracy theory that seems all complete, and it can't really be proved or disproved. So that's like good fiction. Good fiction persuades you that it's real, while at the same time it's entertaining you and stimulating you, and it's not subject to kind of rational analysis. I mean, David Icke obviously isn't that bad. It's actually, there's some good stuff in there, but overall it creates this narrative that people can then superimpose onto their lives to a degree. So maybe the degree that SJ was talking about, it provides a defense against the first matrix and the encroachment of other social things that they find oppressive. They can feel that they've got a whole different interpretation of reality that somehow makes sense of this one and creates a buffer. But it itself is kind of dissociated and divorced from reality, because they're not able to verify any of it, not able to check any of it. So then they've been reprogrammed. And I think that's the key to what makes us programmable, is the more that we let ourselves be programmed, the more programmable we are. Just as the more we use technology, the more we rely on it, the more we'll give up our own capacity to discern, the more susceptible we'll be to more and more malware, essentially. Basically, that's a good metaphor, isn't it? The more you use your computer, the more online you go, the more dodgy websites you go to, the more viruses you're going to get. So anyway, bring it back to, this is kind of a question that no one has to answer, obviously, but just to think about anyway. And I'm curious and interested. Is the stuff I'm writing about the thrift store, have you seen how it is compatible with the more larger analysis of social parapolitical reality? Is there going to be an overlap there? Because in my own life there has been. In fact, yesterday, and I certainly wouldn't say this on YouTube, but I feel I can say this here. Somebody came into the shop who I knew by sight, because she's a regular shopper, and I had heard about her separately through my wife, but I didn't connect the two. Like, I didn't know who my wife was talking about, and she had emailed me. But anyway, she's a survivor of organized ritual abuse, and so she came in to me to talk about it. And because we couldn't talk about it very much in the shop, but I should probably talk to her for the podcast. But she said enough for me to consider that she was a credible person, and that seemed to, that she was embedded in that world and those experiences. So that's a moment at which, and there have been others, at which my researches enter all the way into everyday reality. Now, of course, there's lots of researchers and go who talk to survivors. So I don't just mean that, because that's just good research, but I mean that it's just my ordinary life, and they're there among us, or that aspect is there, as I always knew it must be, but has been invisible, for 50 years. Like, even though I've known about it or believed in it being there for 30 years, the ability to actually see it and spot it has not been there, or the opportunity. Like, it's so well concealed. And well, I mean, I think that speaks to the larger question of how we're programmed not to see it, and how we're embedded in a culture that is not what it appears to be, and the reason we can't see it is that we have been shaped by the culture, that doesn't want us to see it, kind of thing. So that's very Matrix-like.
Can I say something, Jason?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, something that struck me yesterday, I was just doing an upgrade to my PC, just put a new disk in there. And so I was handling all the electronics and, looking at the motherboard and so on. And it occurred to me that this tension that seems to have happened within the United States, of this sort of, which is sort of embodied really in Trump, the sort of a Make America Great, this sort of dissolution of Americanism in favor of internationalism, and this tension of the Wall Street desire to sort of own everything, and how that was in tension with the traditional isolationism of the United States. But another aspect of that, which hadn't occurred to me until yesterday, which is to do with the innovation of computing that took place within America, and the way that transformed the self-image of Americans. That these inventions, that this new way of thinking, in order to make these machines, in order to make computer processors, in order to do all the thinking necessary to go from metal to something programmable, how that informed the picture that the people who made those breakthroughs had of themselves, and how they thought of other people. And I think that this then came into, and we can see that within some well-known accounts of survivors of trauma-based mind control, of the way that the people were then, that they were programmed by analogy to a computer. So by analogy with the sort of mathematics and the sort of thinking process that went into how to make computers work, was then applied to how to program people.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that this had a destructive effect on the sort of interiority of American culture, and really is the underpinning of this sort of globalist, the sort of globalist monoculture. Is the underpinning of that are these theories of programmability, computation, that have come out of the information technology industry. That then in a very direct way, these people have been applied to people. And I think much of the real way that those things are applied to people is classified. And what we only get is a sort of ideological whiff, the ideological whiff of it, rather than the really brutal truth about it.
Mm. Well, last week I brought up this phrase, externalized mind. I don't know if anyone remembers, because I hadn't used that phrase before. And it's, it came up in this process of struggling to understand what's going on, of course, but specifically what's going on in terms of technology and how we've shaped the technology that's shaping us. This is what Martin's referring to there. And my point was and is that how this works is a symbiosis, because the computer technology that is being created, that is then recalibrating our ideas about human consciousness and about individuals and how they're programmable and so on. That technology itself, I believe, was created via or as an externalization of an internal psychological complex. As in, human beings, collective and individual, are trying to get free of something within their own psyches let's say, I'm putting it a bit not as neutral as I would like, or trying to understand something by unconsciously externalizing it, acting it out, because that's what we do. If we have some trauma program in us, and program, of course, this is the new language. If we have some trauma embedded in our bodies, we'll find any way we can to get free of it. And the primary way of that is by unconsciously enacting it so that it gets externalized, so we see it. We can do it to someone else, or we find someone who will do it to us again and again and again, as in, romantic partners who crush our heart and soul over and over again, or we experience that. We're unconsciously seeking them out, or we seek someone will do it too, unconscious revenge, whatever. That, I think that's playing out on much more multi-leveled, in much more multi-level ways than just relationships. I mean, it's all human relationships, think about it. But like the whole superstructure of our society and culture, you could see is the evidence of a reenactment, and even like sculptures, like these psychosomatic sculptures that we're creating to try and see. So it's all art in a way. But like what Pablo was saying, nothing is artificial in that regard. But then you can see how that would avalanche, that would just exponentially, like a feedback loop that just keeps until it gets this deafening roar of a dystopia, I suppose. I kind of wanted to bring it back to the specifics there, because it was a bit of a overwhelming thing. The other thing that I think is part of this, what Martin was describing, is theory of mind, and how this whole thing about how we develop theory of mind in order to interact with the other. And we base our theory of mind on, of course, what we experience in our own mind, but then we also, our own experience, our own configuration of our mind is shaped by our theory of mind, about what we imagine about others. So if you then interject computers into that, we've got the theory of artificial mind. And it's like, in order to try and understand computers or artificial intelligence, we have to sort of project our own minds onto it, but then that flips over and we start using our own creations and our own ideas about artificial intelligence to try and, well, I don't know if it's exactly try and understand our own mind, though we do that also because we're using all these metaphors now to describe human consciousness that belong to computers, but also to reconfigure. We're actually reconfiguring our minds to match our ideas about artificial intelligence, as if the more we can convince ourselves that we're machines, or the more we can reconfigure our own consciousness to simulate machine intelligence, the better equipped we will be to create machine intelligence, which makes sense. We would be, of course.
If we do manage to imbue a machine with the kind of intelligence, it will be necessarily different to our own. In what way, we can't be sure, but is it not quite likely that in creating that intelligence, let's just say for a minute that it's possible, it would enable us to learn perhaps many crucial things that we're missing about ourselves because we suffer, or perhaps, you could make an argument that we suffer from a lack of other conscious beings that have the ability to communicate, other than other humans who are all running with the same basic plan.
So like it would be like talking to God,
or just something different on a like deep qualitative level. Not necessarily God, could be vastly inferior to us in many ways, and I assume God is something superior in every way.
Yeah, I was being a bit clear, but obviously that is where it naturally could expand outward too. But also extraterrestrials, like the fascination with extraterrestrials and the feeling that if we could meet and interact with them, we would solve the riddle of our own existence.
But is there not something to that, or?
Well, I don't know. I've never met an extraterrestrial, so.
As far as you know.
I mean, again, it's back to this intersection between religion and science, I think. Well, no, I mean, you're saying something practical. But I think it ends up there. So with the practical, yeah, absolutely. But I wouldn't expostulate all the way out into some hypothetical future there. I'd say we're already interacting with artificial intelligence every day on the internet, however rudimentary. It's algorithmic intelligence, or whatever we want to call it. It's interactive, and it behaves as if it was sentient, even though we know it's not. And I mean, very rudimentary sentience, but it makes choices and so on, right? For us, it's making choices for us. That was the point on the audio. So then we can look at that. Are we learning more about ourselves through the internet? Don't know. I mean, some people are. I feel like I am. Like right now, we're doing this through the internet. To some extent, it made the choice for us. Like it even gave us unlimited time. This would have ended if the AI sentience, as such as it is, hadn't given us that extra thing. So that's an example of how the technology is, shaping interaction. In this case, seemingly benevolently. But that's sort of one example. I mean, this meeting is just one example of how to use the internet. Obviously, the majority of people are using Facebook and clicking like and so on, and lowering their level of sentience, I would say, by letting themselves be programmed by the programs that they're using. Now, that's also an opportunity to learn about themselves, but they're not, by definition, they're not taking it. Some of us can learn more about human beings by observing other human beings' behavior and so on, right? But I think, isn't that built into my model of an external mind? Like it couldn't be anything but an opportunity to learn about ourselves. That kind of thing, what you're saying.
But is it something that we would never get to without that other intelligence? Could we theoretically, given infinite time, work it out on our own? Or is there something that it can give us that nothing else can? I know I'm asking like you know the answer.
Well, that's back to what I was saying at the, beyond the practical level, this science religion unholy alliance that what was I going to say? That, well, I mean, it's kind of includes what you're saying, this idea that we need the technology to guide us. Clearly, we're replacing one ideological belief system with another at that point, because previously we needed God to guide us. So, so there's various things to question there. First of all, is it true that we need God to guide us? And if so, trying to replace him would be obviously a heresy. And if it's not true, can science succeed where God failed? And so on. I mean, yeah, there's various ways one could go with that. I was going to, when I was talking about the external mind, I was going to bring it to a sort of originary myth of Satan or Lucifer. Not that they're the same, but Lucifer became Satan. As in, there's something in us from the inception onward, the original sin thing, that has caused us to, and Gibbon and I touched on this in our last conversation, it's going to be on the podcast. It started with fire, discovering fire, which is the Promethean gift, stolen from the gods, that we started to look outside of ourselves for a reference point to understand our nature. Now, if our true nature is divine and in God's image, which of course is loaded language, but let's just say if, then you can't refer outside of yourself with that. That was the whole thing that the Jews were about, was no graven images, right? And so yeah, I'd say that that tendency, or whatever it was, more than a tendency, wasn't it? It was that impulse or that urge to project outward well, my brain's getting frozen now. Well, that relates to the temptation in the garden, original sin, and that also relates to where we're at now in terms of the technology that we're creating, that we're going to bow down to and worship, and that actually tell us who we are and define us. Like we've externalized a neurotic complex that was itself about externalizing or looking outside of ourselves for something to guide us. So you got the
Luciferian.
Well, it relates to Luciferianism in the Steiner way, which is the power of the imagination. So if you give ascendancy to the power of the imagination, again, you're replacing reality with an image, I think, and that's what we're doing right now, isn't it? We're looking at images of each other, and we're taking that for a reality, and we have to, like, to have this experience, we have to take it as reality. Like, I'm not going to be thinking, well, maybe that's not really Martin, or maybe he's not really wiping his brow now, maybe I'm being deceived. And it's just not, it's not economical to think like that, even though actually those are reasonable questions. Like, at what point does the semi-sentient AI start to mess with us? Well, it already has.
Are you completely alone right now?
That was a joke, right?
Yeah. Or was it?
Well, I mean, I suppose the serious answer is yes and no, isn't it?
I think much more realistically than being concerned with the idea of a completely mechanical intelligence and the effect that would have on us, I think much more realistically, what people are going to have to deal with is the interaction of created biology. So people born without parents, with an engineered genetic makeup, in a sense fathered by a machine and mothered, and in some ways incorporating technology perhaps as well internally. Those organisms, I suppose they would still be people, as distinct from other people who haven't been through that. I think that is a realistic prospect. I think the technology, the published technology, published science in that area, I think is far enough along that we can see that, well, that is going to come about in some way. So I think the effect that has on consciousness, the sort of sense of possibility, the sense of what is real, I think that aspect, that the mingling of technology and biology, the sort of programming of biology, that is going to be far more impactful, I think, than just a pure mechanical sort of algorithmic iterative process.
Well, I see it all as one continuum, though, because there are many ways that we're letting technology into our lives and into our interior lives that don't involve prosthetic limbs or artificial insemination, or and certainly, like, we're being more and more softened up and opened to the possibility or the belief that there is no dividing line between artifice and real, between technology and biology. and of course for many people the literally physically isn't, whether it's limbs or implants or whatever else. But for all of us who are using the technology, it's certainly figuratively becoming more and more true. And the weird thing, well, one weird thing about it, and maybe it's back to the satanic counterfeit, is that a spiritual perspective also has to question this. Like in the book I'm working on now, Neurodeviant, I posit the human body is technology of consciousness, and I disliked having posited that, but at the same time, it was part of a thesis and a work that I felt was very valid and meaningful. So, and that was necessary to talk about the body as technology for consciousness, because it expanded the parameters of what we think of as technology, not because it reduces the body to something. And I think that's the positive potential way to go with this, is that whatever's happening, there's a higher principle at work. And I think this is kind of my disagreement with Dave O'Shaughnessy. I feel that, at least the way I was understanding his perspective, was unnecessarily dualistic. And that for me, seeing the encroachment of a seemingly satanic technocracy or whatever in the world isn't a reason to lament, and it isn't something to try and escape or fight or resist. It's just something that's happening. And yes, it's truly horrific, like unimaginably horrific, if we really start to see what the bones that it's being built upon, and the screams and the wails that are fueling it. It's like Dante's, ninth circle. But I mean, I don't know what the but is. It's certainly not so what. It's but what can we do about it except see it? I mean, it takes so much courage to see it. I don't see why anyone would talk about trying to save us from it. Because if you haven't seen what's happening, how do you know? How can you begin to formulate any kind of salvation strategy? Unless it's the traditional religious one, which is mine, essentially. It's surrender to reality. And it seems to me that seeing the depth of the mechanism that we're trapped in is the best way to surrender. It seems like it's the truest way, because it's kind of the hardest, but it's also the easiest because it's logical. I mean, if we were, well, for science and religion again, I was going to say, if we were really logical creatures, we would surrender to God, because logically God is bigger than we are, so there's no point in trying to co-opt that. But of course, I just presented a paradox, because if we were logical minded, we wouldn't, well, I was going to say we wouldn't recognize God, but I'm not sure that's true necessarily. It's a bit of a puzzle. But anyway.
Yeah, I think is very, very important. But the idea. Sorry, say again.
What's important?
Bearing witness. Bearing witness. Because bearing witness is the path for judgment to take place, and it's something that I use in a small way with people around me. That if I feel people are being antisocial, often it's futile to argue with somebody about something or to try and correct their behaviour. But if you unconsciously, in a sense, but consciously let them know that you are witnessing their behaviour, what they're doing, then they will become aware sometimes that you are aware of them, and that then allows for them to then, through that awareness, make a fairer judgment of themselves and what they're doing. And I think that in a broader sense is a meaningful thing to do, that to be an authentic witness of what is happening in the world. an authentic path for consciousness, I think is a worthy activity. I think being such a small and powerless organism with respect to the sort of gigantic systems that we're witnessing, I think that's in some ways the best that we can do. The best that we can do is we can bear witness to it, and components of it can feel that we are doing that we are witnessing it. We are aware of what's happening, at least.
Yeah.
Can I say a quick few thoughts here? Yeah, I think this is really interesting, and this idea of what you're saying as a witnesser. I'm just, big concern with the technology and the advancement of technology is there going to be a moment where we cross the Rubicon, so to speak, to where that witnessing facility is attacked, such that we cease to lose like an essential nature or our essential human core, or is there even one? But just to go back, I mean, like the idea of language as being a technology. We used to memorize things. Apparently, according to the history books, humanity was a very memory-based transmitter of ideas. And when language came, a technology, it externalized words such that we lost that memory facility. I think we've talked about this, Jason, maybe on the podcast that I did with you. But was that something that was to be lamented? I mean, I think we'd all probably agree we retained some kind of essential core, whether we want to call it a divine spark or just what makes us human, whatever we're trying to pay attention to kind of heal, whatever that is, it was retained when written language came to pass, and we lost these other capabilities, let's say. But are we approaching a moment where this biological technology, that's kind of what I'm, I guess, more afraid of, maybe in a way, like inhaling nanoparticles, then reprogram my DNA, things like vaccines, where people are making a case that what's being injected into the body is changing, this perceptive ability. You have like this theory that autism is designed to make obedient workers or to somehow reduce humans into just a biological substrate for some kind of programming where that consciousness quotient is lowered. So, I mean, I guess that's just where I'm going with this. And I don't know the answer to that. I mean, maybe in this world where we're all these kind of autistic people, that's where we still have an ability to have this divinity. Maybe that's not to be afraid, something not to be afraid of in a similar way that we shouldn't have feared the development of writing. Or, and this is the last point I want to make, is it kind of like this survival idea, and this is where I'm at with it right now, is that just like I was referring to earlier, using parapolitical research to get distance to kind of inculcate myself from this threat of lies. Are we still in a time where like I need to not ingest GMOs, for example, or not take the vaccines because there's something essential is on the line? And I know for me, I mean, I don't eat McDonald's for that reason, because of what I've done it in the past, of how I felt in the body and what I've read about, other people's experience with that. I don't want to harm my body, and so I think, anyhow, that's a few ideas there, but I just think that there's trying to untangle like what's a true biological threat, what is the inevitable march of technology using biology, and how do we navigate this stuff? So just a few thoughts there.
Yeah. Well, again, I mean, the body seems to be our only reference point, and that, of course, is confounding, because we're nearing a stage where our whole idea about the body is being undermined. So that to me is a red flag. Like, that's the line not to cross. The postmodernist, or whatever we're going to call it, scientific line that's trying to recalibrate our ideas about physical reality in such a way that the body is no longer a trustworthy reference point. It becomes irrelevant, which of course we would see would be consistent with a system that's more and more life-destroying and more antithetical to the body, or hostile to it. I mean, maybe not overtly hostile, but anyway, is incompatible with it. like poisonous to it, toxic to it, it would be consistent with that. Like we would generate our own fictions and rationalizations in order to keep taking the meds, so to speak. I mean, actually, that's a pretty literal metaphor, isn't it? Because people are taking meds on a daily basis and destroying their bodies, telling themselves various different, reasons that it doesn't matter. Same reason they're eating at McDonald's, or the same way, rather, that they're eating at McDonald's. And I think there's a basic appeal actually in shutting the body down and sabotaging the body, because the body, if the body is our instrument, our organ of sentience, then essentially the more we pollute the body, the less sentient we become, the easier it is to get with the program. And
Yeah, I've heard North Americans do that. They have a phrase where they say, I have anxiety. I have anxiety and I need to take such and such medication for my anxiety, as if anxiety was a disease, rather than a state of feeling. And so that already has happened. People are already doing that.
Yeah,
big time. It's everywhere. I mean, it's my anxiety. People refer to that. It's become just a common, pathologized, accepted state of affairs for sure in North, at least in Texas, where I'm from.
Well, it's something that Dalrymple pointed out about depression, the term depression, that he realized after a while that nobody talked about being unhappy anymore. They all talked about depression. They have depression because depression can be treated. Unhappiness can't. And unhappiness implies, because it's part of an older sort of set of beliefs or interpretation, it implies that you're living in a way that is not good for you. Like, you're unhappy, there must be a reason for it. So you look at the whole system, which isn't just the body, but I'd say it certainly starts with the body, or it starts or ends at least, and then you address that rather than just pouring things in it. So we've got a body that basically carries our consciousness around, and it's subject to different moods or disorders that are chemical imbalances, and then we just adjust the chemical imbalances, and then everything's fine. And so that's okay. So that's evolving now into eventually potentially get rid of the body entirely, either replace it with a synthetic replica, or download your consciousness into a machine. But either way, you get free. You have a body, or you have an existence that's entirely programmable. You can simply program it with the desired moods and abilities and all the rest of it.
Something else I've noticed is the way that young people use the word literal. That the word literal has been denuded of meaning.
Yeah.
And I think that is not accidental. I think that is part of the same outlook or philosophy of life, in that literality becomes something actually happening, becomes less important than one's sentiment about it, and so the word literal is being denied its meaning as a kind of expression of this denial of literality, if you like.
Denial of the physical, yeah, that's right. Because it's if you say this is literally this or literally that, it's just emphasis now. It just means that person feels it really strongly, whatever it is they're saying.
Yeah, it's to make something seem comedic, rather than actually to engage with reality.
Well, yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to say the trans agenda, and I'd say this with all deference. I mean, it's really hard to talk about this without offending people, but I think it bridges the two things you guys just were mentioning: the idea of like a literal man that's gone, or a literal woman, and now there is this kind. And Jason, you were talking about the body and losing the instrument, and I think that. I know you've done shows on it, Jason, but it just feels like that is right now one of the, on the short list of social agendas, let's say, or movements in society that are part of this, whatever this change is, denuding meaning from things that used to be obvious, getting us away from our bodies. And it's scary, it's scary. And not only that, but then like getting attacked. Like I have a friend, I just met a person a friend of mine from online. I met her and her partner for the first time. And her partner's going through a transition and is having the surgery this year at some point, she told me. And, I just tried to give love in that moment and just, I wasn't going to like go in with the ideas we're necessarily discussing here, but I guess I'm feeling a little, I want to handle it with grace as this issue, as we get more and more in touch with this issue, like how, give love to people, support people. But at the same time, if I'm feeling like literalism is under threat, my body and this technology is under threat, it just seems like it's going to be a tough going to navigate some of these zones as we head into this.
Yeah. And you don't have kids. Because I was going to ask you, you're muted by the way. I was going to ask you earlier.
No kids yet. Yeah.
Because that's when the stakes really go up, right? That's when it becomes much harder not to drink the Kool-Aid. I don't like that expression because I don't think they did drink Kool-Aid at Jonestown, but yeah. So, and I was the thing about saying that if you look at the trans thing, where the idea of a literal physical biology has been replaced by the idea of a literal physical ego self that has gender. That inversion is exemplary, and it's really couched, it's nested in the corporate agenda. That's very plain if you look into how many corporations are supporting the transgender thing, how it's going to be $1 billion industry by 2024 and so on, right? It's a corporate agenda, and corporate, of course, is body. So we've got, again, this externalized counterfeit, not just of the body, but of the collective. So it's actually a counterfeit of, well, it's not actually, I'm using that word wrongly there, but one could see it as a counterfeit of the body of Christ. This idea that we are all one, we're all part of one community body. And even without going there, just the reality of community, which is almost lost now, but I'm having a lived experience of it in this town, what there is of it, what it could be. Corporations have taken over that like cuckoos. They've inserted themselves into that, or they are, you could say they're the shadow manifestation of that. And I have to just keep bringing it back to this. Like for me, there's a difference between what I know in my own body is good for my, recognizing what's good for my own body and sticking with that and listening to my body and staying in tune with my body. That can't extend to other people's bodies. Like I can't tell somebody who comes in that they're going to transition surgery and blah, 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 don't do it to your body, that's terrible, and so on and so forth. To a certain extent, I mean, I could if I knew them, of course, but let's say in the example you gave, also I'm going to have to keep quiet. But, and rather, to a certain extent, I can't even quite know that. It's like if someone's smoking pot every day, I can know that that's not good for them at a certain level, but I can't know it across the board because they might suicide if they didn't smoke pot. Same, of course, this is the rationalization for transgender, that they're a suicide risk. I happen to think it's mostly bullshit, but I happen to think most of everything is bullshit. But it's not entirely negligible. Like this thing, what does a person have to do to cope? Maybe they do need to eat at McDonald's every day. Maybe they do need to smoke pot. Maybe they do need to transition to a different gender. Like I'm not my brother or my sisters or my, whatever the term is now, keeper. I'm not a keeper of any of these pronouns. But I am my own keeper, and I am responsible for what I do to my body and what I let others get away with me, let's say. As in, if somebody's going to say, I'm a man in a woman's body and you have to respect that, I'm going to end up like channeling Jordan Peterson if I don't watch out. Probably not the best example because it's been done to death. But I mean, if somebody's going to tell me, why don't you eat at McDonald's? It's perfectly, you know, blah, 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 and they'll come up with some law of attraction bullshit rationale, then I'm going to actually say something at that point. They're deluded and I'm not going to be complicit with somebody's delusion. I'm too angry for that. Sorry. Maybe if I was more at peace, but I don't know. I mean, Jesus threw over the moneylender's tables. Like there is a use for anger when one is confronted with hypocrisy, delusion, you know, destructive, contaminating behaviors. So that, I mean, I guess my point is that the real sacrifice that needs to be protected is the base reality that the body is an intelligence, has intelligence, and is trustworthy. And it's universal. What's good for my body is good for your body. It's not some mix and match, Baskin-Robbins, pick your gender kind of smorgasbord. The human body is made the way it's made, and it's consistent. There's no body on this planet, no body, that a Big Mac is actually going to be good for, because you can't transmute stuff internally through the power of will. Well, I don't think you can. That's the only argument. You're going to have to present that argument as the counter argument. Oh, it's mind over matter. Well, I just don't believe it. Sorry. Show me the evidence. If you really got mind over matter, why do you need the surgery? Just transmute into a woman, dude. You know? And if you had that power, why would you want to eat at McDonald's? Like, there's just inherent contradictions, and when people, they go off into the la-la land of, and it's maddening. I agree, and threatening. And yes, one wants to just have a loving interaction with whoever it is. But as my latest blog post, which I haven't got up yet, I haven't managed to get it up, so to speak. Sometimes there's need just to actually be blunt with people and just say, sorry, I'm not going to take your shit, and just in order to breathe, like SJ was saying about needing to defend against the lies. Well, I would question the word defense as in that's not the one. I don't want to be in a defense position, but I don't think saying no is a defense position. It's a respect position. I respect you enough to tell you need to respect me right now and back the fuck off with your whatever it is bullshit. Because I've only got so many seconds on this earth and so many breaths to take. I don't want to be breathing your own, ideological farts.
I think that relates to the thing that I spoke before about bearing authentic witness.
Yeah.
The other thing to, I think, understand is that issue of whether or not something is good for somebody is to understand that the creation of need, such that something is necessary for somebody to have something, is an aspect of social control and also of capitalist exploitation. So the actual creation of the situation.
Uh-oh, you're broken up. Yeah.
Because that's the best thing for him, or the best bet for that person is to have a sex change. That may well be true at a certain level, but it denies the system of deprivation that's underneath it, such that demand has come about. And I think that part of bearing authentic witness is in being knowledgeable about that aspect of the system, and transmitting that also to other people, such that when they make those sorts of choices about, I need to have a sex change, or I need to keep drinking, or I need to fast food and so on, that they're doing it at least with some, that they're at least informed in some way about how they've come into that situation of needing that thing. And if they still need it, well, they still need it. That's just the way it is. That's the situation we're in. But I think it's at least refreshing for people to feel in some way, they're claiming some control of their own origin, how they came to be in their situation that they are now. I think that is helpful. Another thing I was going to say is this question of control through corporatism. One of the ways that it seems to function is through the granting of rights within its system. So it promotes itself as a force of liberation, as in that it allows people to have certain rights that they wouldn't otherwise have. But the point is that those rights only exist within that system. So you have to go into the system in order to take on those rights. And so that's if you look at, say, in Afghanistan, the way that the war in Afghanistan is framed in terms of they're giving the women of Afghanistan rights that they wouldn't otherwise have, and so dominating and transforming the country and trying to integrate it into the international financial system, the corporate system, is the right thing to do, because the people will have rights that they wouldn't otherwise have, and so it's a justification for domination and the transformation of everybody, really. And so it's very interesting to see what rights get promoted and what rights don't get promoted. For example, indigenous land rights, you'll never see indigenous land rights promoted within the sort of corporate promotion of rights and individual rights. It's always rights that can be given within that system, that system can provide.
We thought about the rights, the different words, rights and rights, the different spellings and different meanings, but they have a kind of overlap somehow. Like there's a ritualistic aspect to the giving of rights. A bit like, in the audio I was playing about the algorithms and stuff, how you create the code and then you pray, how they're like cathedrals. It's like that there's an element of faith involved. Maybe it's in everything, but in what you're talking about with rights, like I don't think I ever believed in the idea of rights, but it became conscious later on in life. But that I felt what you were saying, that the whole idea of rights was a Trojan horse, essentially. And it's the same about technology as well. The technology offers certain things so that then you'll enter into the cathedrals that it's created. And essentially, something that is bestowing rights upon us, it's implicitly evoking the faith, not just that it can give the rights, but that without it we would not have those freedoms. In other words, it's supplanting nature and God with itself.
Yeah, and it seems to be supplanting property rights and land rights as well. It seems to be that what people are really being asked to give up is their right to any sort of ownership in the physical world, and the rights that they're being offered, the sort of freedom that they're offered is this kind of ethereal technological freedom, identity freedom, whereas their actual ability to possess and to transform their environment around them is the thing that they're not supposed to have anymore. Right,
and there's the thing with cars, no, that you're not allowed to work on your car in the US anymore, apparently, and the reasoning is it relates to the fact that the cars are run on computers. So they're not. You can't. Lay people can't mess with the computers. So again, the technology is taking over the right of ownership, and we're in response to that, we're giving up our autonomy and our own capacities are being surrendered over to something outside of ourselves. I think Floyd just showed up, unfortunately very late, because I'm actually going to have to wind up. I would carry on longer, but I've got something on at 2, so that's 10 minutes. I was going to have lunch, but I have foregone my lunch for this occasion. seeing as it seemed a worthy one, and it was a good turnout. So I just leave it to anyone else, just in case anyone else wants to say anything before I sign off. Maybe not.